I never believed in family curses. If you'd told me a year ago that blood could rot a person from the inside out, that something could cling to your name and follow you no matter how far you ran, I would have laughed it off. But that was before the lawyer's call, before the envelope that arrived 2 days later, and before I ever set foot in that house. The letter was short. Mr. Lawson, we regret to inform you of your Uncle Raymond's passing. As the last living heir, you've inherited the Lawson estate in Graybridge County. Please contact us at your earliest convenience. That was it. No condolences, no sentiment, not even a phone number. Just an address printed at the bottom, written in an almost faded typewriter font, as if it had been copied 100 times before. I barely remembered Uncle Raymond. He was my mother's older brother, the one who'd supposedly gone strange in his later years. My mom never spoke much about him, except to say he'd chosen solitude after their parents' deaths. The few times I asked, she changed the subject. When I was a kid, I thought he was some eccentric hermit. Later, I realized nobody in our family ever visited him, not even for the holidays. And yet somehow, his property was now mine. At first, I didn't think much of it. The idea of inheriting an old house sounded romantic in a weird way. I'd been stuck in a dead-end job, living in a rented apartment where the neighbors fought through the walls. A free home, even an ancient one, felt like a second chance. I drove down to Graybridge that Friday. The road there wound through empty farmland and overgrown forest. My GPS cut out halfway, leaving me to follow the lawyer's printed directions. It was early evening by the time I reached the driveway, if you could even call it that. The gate was half collapsed, the iron rusted through like bone dust. The house stood at the end of a long gravel path, swallowed by trees on every side. It wasn't grand, not like a mansion from movies, more like a decaying colonial house that had once been impressive 100 years ago. The windows were clouded with dirt, the paint stripped off by decades of wind and rain, but there was something imposing about it, the kind of presence that made the air feel thicker. I remember cutting the engine and sitting there for a while, just looking at it. The house was silent, but not in a peaceful way, more like it was listening. When I finally stepped inside, the air hit me like I'd entered a tomb. Cold, damp, and faintly metallic, like rusted pipes or old blood. Dust floated in the slanted light from the doorway, and every step on the warped wood echoed too long. Most of the furniture was still there, covered in yellowed sheets, as if the house had been expecting company that never came. I found the power switch near the door, but nothing happened. The electricity had long since died, so I explored by flashlight. Each room felt like it belonged to a different time. Some had floral wallpaper and cracked mirrors. Others were empty except for outlines on the walls where pictures used to hang. The kitchen was surprisingly intact. The stove still had a pot on it, dried into a black crust like something fossilized. I tried not to think about how long ago someone had last used it. Upstairs, the hallway stretched endlessly. At the far end was a single closed door unlike the others. Heavy wood, reinforced with iron bolts and locked from the outside. I tried the handle, no give. Someone had wanted to keep that door shut. When I leaned close, I could swear I smelled something faint. Not rot exactly, but old air, stale and warm, as if something behind it had been sealed away too long. I told myself it was probably a storage room. Old houses always have weird spaces like that. That first night, I camped out in the parlor. I'd brought a sleeping bag, a lantern, and a couple of sandwiches. The silence was almost unbearable. There was no sound from outside, not even crickets, just the faint groaning of the house settling around me. At some point after midnight, I heard footsteps upstairs. I froze, my flashlight clutched in my hand. They weren't loud, just slow, deliberate creaks that moved from one end of the hall to the other. I told myself it was the wood expanding with temperature, but deep down, I knew it wasn't random. The pattern was too even, too human. Then, nothing. The sound stopped. When I finally managed to fall asleep, I dreamed I was standing outside the locked room at the end of the hall. The door was open and someone was whispering my name from inside. The next morning, I woke up to find muddy footprints on the floorboards. They led from the staircase to the parlor, and they stopped exactly where I'd been sleeping. When I called the lawyer that day, his assistant picked up instead. She told me he was on leave and wouldn't be reachable for some time. When I asked about Uncle Raymond, about what he'd been doing in the house before he died, she paused for a long time before answering. "Mr. Raymond Lawson was found in his study," she said finally. There was no sign of struggle. The coroner ruled it heart failure. "Was anyone else living there with him?" I asked. "Not officially." That word, officially, stuck with me. After hanging up, I decided to go through the study myself. It was the only room downstairs with the door still locked. I had to pry it open with a crowbar from the shed. Inside, the air was thick with mold and something chemical, like old varnish or decayed paper. The room was lined with shelves full of notebooks, dozens of them, arranged neatly. The desk was covered in dust, except for a single cleared space where a book had recently lain. On the floor beneath the window, there was a dark stain. The wood had warped around it. I didn't want to think about what it was. I flipped through one of the notebooks. The handwriting was cramped, erratic, a mix of dates, sketches, and half-finished sentences. Phrases like, "The ritual must be completed before solstice," and "The blood recognizes its own," kept appearing. The later entries were almost unreadable, just scribbles that grew darker and deeper until the paper tore. One page stood out. It was written in red ink, or something darker, and read, "The one who inherits must remember. The one who remembers must remain." I didn't know what that meant, not yet. I thought about leaving that day. I really did. But the thing about old houses, about inheritance, is that once they've chosen you, it's not so easy to walk away. Because that night, the house began to remember me. After that second night, sleep became impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the same soft creaks above me, the pacing, the whispering shuffle of weight across the boards. I tried recording it on my phone once, but when I played it back the next morning, all I heard was silence, followed by one faint breath close to the microphone, like someone standing over me, listening. By day 3, I stopped trying to rationalize it. I just moved through the house with the sense that something was watching me from behind every half-closed door. The more I explored, the more I found things that didn't fit. Doors that led nowhere, steps that ended against walls, rooms whose windows had been bricked over from the inside. It felt like the house had grown around itself in confusion, a maze built by someone who'd forgotten where it began. In the library, I discovered another notebook wedged behind the mantel. The handwriting was cleaner than the others, maybe from my grandfather's time. Inside were lists of names, every generation of the Lawson family, dating back to the late 1800s. Next to each name was a symbol, a small circle, sometimes crossed, sometimes filled. Some were marked with words like keeper or bound. My mother's name was there too. Next to hers was a single word, freed. The word gave me a chill I couldn't shake. Freed from what? That evening, the temperature dropped. It was late summer, but the air inside turned brittle and cold. My flashlight flickered and died, even with fresh batteries. I lit a candle and sat in the parlor, trying to read by its trembling light. That's when I heard a faint knocking from upstairs. Slow, deliberate, like a hand against wood. 3 knocks. Pause. Then 3 again. It was coming from the locked door at the end of the hall. I wanted to leave. God, I wanted to. But the strange thing was, the thought of leaving made me nauseous, like my body refused the idea. My skin prickled, my heartbeat went erratic, and every step toward the front door felt heavier than the last. The air itself seemed to push against me, urging me to turn back. So I did. I went upstairs. Each step creaked like the house was whispering under my weight. The knocking stopped when I reached the end of the hall, but the air there was warmer, thicker, as if something on the other side of that door was breathing. I tried the handle again, still locked, but now, beneath the iron bolts, I could see faint scratches, not random, but words carved into the wood. I leaned closer and read them one by one. Do not open. Do not let it remember. I stumbled back. My candle nearly went out. That was when the smell hit me. The same one I'd noticed before, stronger now, sour and coppery, like wet iron. I don't remember running downstairs, but I remember locking myself in the study and sitting there until dawn, staring at the notebooks. When sunlight finally broke through, I noticed something new on the desk, a photograph I hadn't seen before. It was tucked beneath one of the journals, black and white, old. In it, 6 people stood on the mansion's porch. My grandfather, my Uncle Raymond, 2 other relatives I didn't recognize, and a woman holding a baby. Someone had scratched the woman's face out completely. On the back, written in neat cursive, Summer 1964, the last gathering. Only one may keep the memory. That day, I decided I needed answers. Graybridge was small, barely a town, more like a cluster of shops along a main road. I stopped at the general store and asked about the Lawson place. The owner, a woman in her 60s, looked at me with something between pity and recognition. "You're one of them, then," she said softly. When I asked what she meant, she only said, "That house keeps its own." No one in town wanted to talk after that. A man at the diner told me the Lawsons used to be guardians of something old, whatever that meant. Another muttered that people had gone missing near the property years back. But everyone had the same final warning: don't stay there after dark. That night, I went back anyway, because something in me needed to know. It wasn't curiosity anymore, it was compulsion, like a voice whispering beneath my own thoughts, urging me to go back upstairs, to open that door. The same phrase echoed over and over in my head: the one who remembers must remain. I started noticing changes around the house. The portraits on the walls, I could have sworn their eyes had moved. Dust patterns shifted overnight. One morning, I found a handprint on the inside of a window I hadn't touched. And the notebooks, the ones I'd stacked neatly, they kept rearranging themselves, always leaving one open to a page I hadn't read yet. Each page was worse than the last, describing something called the Remembrance Rite. It wasn't a ritual of summoning. It was a ritual of containment. According to my uncle's notes, every generation of the Lawson family was bound to preserve a memory that couldn't be destroyed, something too ancient, too dangerous to be forgotten. When the keeper of the memory grew old or weak, the burden had to be passed on. The heir didn't inherit wealth or property. They inherited the memory itself. And once you carried it, you could never leave the house. The rite was supposed to happen in that sealed room upstairs, the one that had been locked for decades. That's where the memory was kept. That night, I couldn't help myself. I took the crowbar, climbed the stairs, and forced the bolts from the door. The moment the door cracked open, a wave of hot, breathless air rolled out, thick with dust and something older. The candle in my hand guttered and nearly died. The room beyond was small, lined with mirrors that faced inward toward an empty wooden chair in the center. The mirrors were blackened with age, but I could still see faint shapes moving across them, shapes that didn't match my reflection. I should have closed the door. I should have run. Instead, I stepped inside. The door slammed behind me on its own. Every mirror flared white for a second, and I felt something slide into my mind. Not a voice, not words, but memories. Memories that weren't mine.
A man digging shallow graves behind the house.
A woman screaming in the attic. Children hiding under the floorboards as footsteps passed overhead. And my uncle, older, terrified, whispering, "I'm sorry, but it needs to stay. It has to stay." When I came to, I was lying on the floor. Hours had passed. The mirrors were all shattered, and the chair was gone. I stumbled downstairs, half conscious, every nerve in my body humming with static. My hands were covered in dust and something dark that looked like dried ink. I washed it off, but the smell wouldn't leave my skin. From that night on, I started hearing whispers, not from upstairs anymore, but inside my own head. They weren't threatening, they were pleading, asking to be remembered. I think that's when I realized what Uncle Raymond had meant in his notes. The memory wasn't just a concept, it was alive. And now, it was in me. After that night, the house stopped fighting me. No more knocks, no more footsteps. Just a quiet that felt heavier than before, like the place was holding its breath. I tried to convince myself it was over, that whatever had haunted my uncle was finally done, but I couldn't leave. The first time I tried to drive away, the road simply didn't end. I followed the gravel path until the trees thinned and then thickened again, bringing me right back to the gate. I thought I'd taken a wrong turn, but the odometer said I'd driven 12 miles. I turned around, tried again. Same thing. The house was the center now. Everything else circled it. The days blurred. I stopped eating much. Time lost its edges. Sometimes the sun rose twice before I realized it hadn't set. Sometimes it stayed dark for what felt like hours. The only thing that stayed constant was the whispering. Quiet, patient, always just under my thoughts. Remember, remember, remember. Then the dreams began. In them, I saw every generation of my family standing in that same mirror room, one by one, taking the chair, opening their eyes as the mirrors flared white. When they stood up again, their faces were blank, wiped clean like pages torn from a book. And someone, always a child, stood watching from the doorway, waiting to take their place. When I woke, I felt the shape of those memories pressing behind my eyes, waiting for release. I found one last notebook buried beneath the floorboards of the study. It was newer. Written in my uncle's neat, deliberate hand, it started calm, recordings of his days, the weather, the maintenance of the house, and then slowly decayed into fear. The memory grows restless. It leaks when I sleep. It wants to return to the mirrors, but the glass won't hold anymore. I see them in my dreams, the ones who carried it before me. They whisper about the air. The air is coming. The final entry was dated a week before he died. Air confirmed. I can hear the car. That was the day I'd gotten the letter. It wasn't an inheritance. It was a handoff. I realized then that every death in this family hadn't been natural. Each keeper had lasted only as long as the memory allowed. When they grew too weak to contain it, the memory looked for new blood, a new mind to live in. A son, a daughter, a nephew who still carried the name. I thought about my mother. How she'd left home at 18 and never looked back. How she'd warned me not to ask about Raymond. Freed, the ledger had said.
She hadn't escaped by chance. She'd escaped because the burden had already been promised to someone else.
Me. The house had been waiting since the day I was born. The next days are a blur. I remember tearing through every room, smashing mirrors, burning journals, shouting until my voice broke. The whispers didn't stop. They only grew clearer. They called me by name. They said they were my family. They said I had to finish what Uncle Raymond couldn't. On the 7th night, I went back to the locked room. The door stood open. The mirrors were gone, but in their place hung thin sheets of glass, shards suspended from the ceiling by wire. They shimmered faintly, each reflecting something different. Faces, places, scenes I didn't recognize but somehow remembered. I saw my grandfather kneeling in the dirt, burying a box. My great-aunt crying as she closed a child's eyes. And Raymond, older, tired, whispering to the empty chair, "Please, not him." I don't know how long I stood there. Eventually the air began to vibrate, humming through my teeth, through the walls. The glass pieces trembled and then lifted, orbiting the chair like stars. My body moved on its own. I sat down. The humming stopped. Every shard flashed white, and for a moment, I saw them all, the ones who'd come before. They weren't ghosts, not exactly. They were impressions, fragments of every thought, every feeling, every fear that had ever lived in this house. All of it pressed into me at once. Pain bloomed behind my eyes. My heartbeat turned into static. I tried to scream, but the air solidified in my throat. And then the whispering became a single, clear voice. It said, "Now you remember." When I woke, it was morning. The glass was gone. The chair was empty. And for the first time since I'd arrived, the house felt completely still. I don't remember leaving the room, but I found myself sitting at the study desk, writing, not with my own words, but with someone else's. Whole sentences flowed through me, details of lives I'd never lived, births, betrayals, murders, secrets. When I looked down, pages of the new notebook were already filled. The ink was still wet. That's when I understood what the family curse really was. The memory wasn't evil, it was preservation. Every generation had to carry it, so the truth of what we'd done, what the Lawsons had protected, would never fade. We were the archive, the living record. The tragedy was that the record couldn't ever stop. It's been months, I think, maybe years. I haven't left the house. The road still loops back, and the phone stopped getting a signal long ago. I don't need food much anymore. Sometimes I hear my uncle's voice reciting facts about winters from 50 years ago, or my grandmother's laughter echoing down the hall. Sometimes I speak in their voices without realizing it. The notebooks keep appearing. I write until my hands ache, then sleep, then write again. Each one begins the same way, without me choosing it. The one who inherits must remember. The one who remembers must remain. I understand it now. That phrase wasn't a warning. It was instruction. Because memories are like ghosts. They only exist as long as someone remembers them. And now, I'm the last one who can. If you ever drive through Graybridge County and see the old Lawson gate standing open, don't come in. If you hear whispers through the trees, don't answer. And if you ever find a letter with my name at the bottom, telling you the estate is yours, burn it. I've done my part. The house is quiet again, but I can feel the memory shifting, restless, already reaching for the next heir. And when it finds you, you'll know what it wants. You'll know what it means to remember.